Yes, I'm live now. Welcome once again to another new video. This is Santhu Sahu and you are watching Sahu's tutorial. Good evening, good evening. I hope that you are all well by the grace of Almighty. Do join quickly. Do join quickly. Good evening to everyone. And I hope that you are all well by the grace of Almighty. Do join quickly and let me share the link in the Telegram channel. Okay, and in this YouTube video here I'll be covering Patrick White, one of the prolific writers in the field of Australian literature, one of the finest writers in the field of Australian literature. He has written some classic novels like Voss, The Solid Mandala, Vivisector, The Longest One. Okay, I'll be covering one by one the summary as well as some important characters and some epigraphs quotations. Okay, each and everything will be covered in this YouTube video. Do join quickly and let me know if everything is okay, if the PPT is visible and if the audio quality is okay, and I am also visible to all of you. Do let me know if everything is okay. Here I will be covering Patrick White, one of the finest writers in the field of Australian literature. He has written some classic novels and he was the first writer to receive the Nobel Prize, first Australian writer to receive the Nobel Prize. He was the first Australian writer to receive the Nobel Prize. I will be covering his important novels as well as some, I will be covering some important novels as well as his plays. He is actually a novelist basically. He has written some poems as well as a playwright. He was also very famous. He has written some autobiographical work as well as he's a screenplay writer. I think everything is okay. So let's begin here. I'll be covering Patrick White, one of the finest novelists, in the field of American literature. So let's begin here, and here is the first slide. I don't want to waste your time. So let's begin here. Okay. Okay, so Patrick White, full name Patrick Victor Patrick, he is known as Patrick White, born in 1912, died in 1990. He was a British-born Australian writer who published 12 novels. So in his lifetime, he had published total 12 novels, 3 short story collections and 8 plays from 1935 to 1987. So all total, he had published 12 novels, 3 short story collections and 8 plays from 1935 to 1987. Okay, 1987. I know. Here, Patrick White's fiction employs humor, florid prose, shifting narrative vantage points, that is actually narrative style, and stream of consciousness techniques. Okay, so these are the techniques you can find in the novels of Patrick White, like humor, shifting narrative vantage points, that is actually narrative style, and stream of consciousness techniques. In 1973, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. So he got the Nobel Prize. Patrick White got the 1973. In 1973, he got the Nobel Prize. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature for an epic and psychological narrative art which has introduced a new continent into literature. As it says in the Swedish Academy citation, only Australian to have been awarded the prize. Only Australian to have been awarded the prize. So in 1973, he got the Nobel Prize in Literature. Who was? It was Patrick White. One question here. 1973, Patrick White got the Nobel Prize. And you see that here James Coetzee, James Coetzee, who won the award in 2003 as a South African citizen before he became an Australian citizen in 2006. So here you need to remember that. James Coetzee won the Nobel Prize in 2003 as a South African citizen before he became an Australian citizen in 2006. Okay, and you see one important point you need to remember here, that he loved the theatre, which he first visited at an early age. His mother took him to see The Merchant of Venice at the age of 6. So when he was 6, actually, his mother had took him to see The Merchant of Venice. And his important works are like the first novel. This is the debut novel. This is the debut novel of Patrick White here. It is Happy Valley. Happy Valley, published in 1939. This is the debut novel of Patrick White, where this novel won 1941 Australian Literature Society Gold Medal. Patrick White dedicated the novel to artist Roy D. Maestri. So to whom he had dedicated this novel to Roy D. Maestri. Roy D. Maestri, it was the name, the person to whom he had. So Patrick White dedicated the first novel, that is Happy Valley, to Roy D. Maestri. The book owed much to the White experiences as a jackal working at Adminaby in the snowy mountains of southern New South Wales. So the book owed much to White's experience. So this is autobiographical element, as a jackal working at Adminaby in the snowy mountain of southern New South Wales. So these are important points you need to remember about Happy Valley, the first debut novel. Which is the first novel? This is the Happy Valley and dedicated to Roy D. Maestri. Okay. The second important novel is here, The Living and the Dead. The Living and the Dead. So his second published book, published in 1941, it was written in the early stage of World War II, whilst the author alternated between the United Kingdom, UK, and the United States here. So this is the second novel here, The Living and the Dead, published in 1941, and it was written in the early stage of World War II, whilst the author alternated between the United Kingdom and the United States. So first Happy Valley, then the second was The Living and the Dead. The Living and the Dead. The Living and the Dead predominantly said in 1930s London. So why it is important? Here you see it is an Australian writer, but the setting is here Living and the Dead is predominantly said in 1930s London. It is predominantly set in 1930s London. That's why the word is very important. Okay, the setting of The Living and the Dead is predominantly set in 1930s London. The stand this is the surname. Okay, mother Catherine, son is the Eliot, and the daughter is Eden. Okay, they are the three characters, important characters of this novel. Here, The Living and the Dead, the Catherine, son Eliot, the son Eliot, daughter Eden. Lead disparate lives under the one roof. The relationship between the three remain detached through the novel, each privately searching for purpose in rapidly changing world, and their significance is overshadowed by the advance of war, deepening the portrayal of the inner bleakness. So this is here the characters like Catherine, Eliot, and Eden. The Living and the Dead raises deep questions about life, death, and those in between. Here you see the mother Catherine died due to cancer. So he died of cancer. With the death of Catherine to cancer, Eden, the character one, decides that her rightful place is in Spain. Okay, after the death of her mother, okay, she moves to Spain. She thinks that her rightful place is in Spain actually. Okay. Another important work is here Aunt Story. The Aunt Story is another important work. It is the third published novel by Australian novelist, here 1973 Nobel Prize winner Patrick White. Patrick White got a Nobel Prize again I am saying 1973. Patrick White here Nobel laureate. Okay, that's why the writer is very important. So the Aunt Story is another important novel by Patrick White. It tells the story of Theodora Goodman. Okay, Theodora Goodman, a lonely middle-aged woman who travels to France after the death of her mother and then to America, where she experiences what is either gradual mental breakdown or an epiphanic revelation, epiphanic revelation. So it tells the story of Theodora Goodman. So who is the protagonist of this novel, The Aunt Story? Here there is the Theodora Goodman, a lonely middle-aged woman who travels to France after the death of her mother and then to America, where she experiences what is either gradual mental breakdown or what is an epiphanic revelation. Okay, you know James Joyce, epiphanic, James Joyce, James Joyce. Okay, it's Ulysses. Okay, epiphanic. So this is an example of here the tree of man. This is an important one. Okay, the tree of man. The tree of man is the fourth published novel by the Australian novelist Patrick White. The tree of man, and here you see that it is a domesticated drama. The tree of man. The tree of man is actually a domesticated drama chronicling the lives of Parker family. So Parker family is important here. Parker family. The tree of man is here chronicling the lives of the Parker family and their changing fortunes over many decades. Okay, it is steeped in Australian folklore and cultural myth, and it is recognized as the author's attempt to infuse the idiosyncratic way of life in the remote Australian bush. So with some sense of the cultural traditions and ideologies that are the epic history of the Western civilization. So there are also bush poets. Okay, who are the Australian bush poets? Do you know will you tell me who are the Australian bush poets? So in the life of the remote Australian bush, with some sense of cultural tradition with ideologies that the epic history of Western civilization has bequeathed Australian society in general. And here, when he comes, this is the quotation that he has written, Patrick White. Where we come to live in Castle Hill, Sydney, White wrote in an attempt to explain the novel that I felt the life was on the surface so dreary, ugly, monotonous. There must be a poetry hidden in it to give it a purpose. And so I set out to discover that the secret core and the tree of man emerged. This is how that it had influenced to write the novel The Tree of Man. Who are the Australian bush poets? So bush poet is actually from Australian literature. Bush poet. Okay, search in Google and tell me the writers of bush poet. Who are the Australian bush poet? Okay. Next slide here. And here the Tree of Man opens as they meet for the first time in the house of Laura's uncle. No, this is here. It is not. It is actually, yeah. Sorry. So here the Tree of Men. The title has been taken from here. Title comes from A. Houseman's poetry cycle, Shropshire Lad. That is very important. Okay. The title of Tree of Men. The title of the Tree of Men has been taken from A. Houseman's poetry cycle called a Shropshire Lad. Lines of which are quoted in the text. Okay. So the title of the Tree of Men has been taken from A. Houseman's poetry cycle, that is called a Shropshire Lad. Shropshire Lad is a poetry collection by A. Houseman. The title has been taken from this one. Okay. And the most classic work by here Patrick White is Voss. That was published in 1957. So Voss was published in 1957. It's the most classic work. It is the fifth published novel by Patrick White. It is based upon the life of the 19th century Prussian explorer. So here this is here actually based on the life of Prussian explorer and naturalist Ludwig, who disappeared while on an expedition into the Australian outback. So Voss is the important classic novel by Patrick White, written in 1957. It is the fifth published novel, and it is based upon the life of the 19th century Prussian explorer and the naturalist Ludwig. Original story, who disappeared while on an expedition into the Australian outback. The novel here characters, there are two total important characters here. The novel centers on two important characters like Voss. There is Voss who is a German, and Laura, who is a young woman, orphaned and new to the colony of New South Wales. So here Voss and Laura, the important two characters. Okay, can you find the metaphysical elements can be found okay in this novel? Metaphysical elements, okay. Though Voss was absent, okay, Laura was able to connect. Though Voss was absent, okay, Voss went to that expedition. Voss was absent, but due to his absence also, okay, in spite of his absence or despite his absence, Laura was able to connect with Voss. So metaphysical elements here visualize. She was able to visualize. Okay, she was able to visualize Voss. So there is a metaphysical elements can be found in this novel here. So Voss and Laura is the important characters in this novel here. Voss and Laura. Okay, next slide here. Okay, and here you see the novel Voss. The novel here Voss opens as they meet for the first time in the house of Laura's uncle, and the patron of Voss' expedition is Mr. Bunner. So who is the patron? Who is the patron of Voss' expedition? It is the Mr. Bunner. Mr. Bunner is the patron of Voss' expedition, and for the first time they meet in the house of Laura's uncle. That is Voss and Laura. They for the first time meet at Laura's uncle house. Okay. And the patron of Voss' expedition is actually Mr. Bunner. Mr. Bunner is the patron. Okay. And here you see John Voss sets out to cross the Australia. So he started to cross the Australian continent. Power cut, no problem. Power cut problem? No. Is power cut problem? No. Are the others? Those who are watching getting disconnected. So no, I think everything is okay here. No power cut issue. Here. Subhamshu. So here Voss sets out to cross. Voss sets out to cross the Australian continent in 1845. So Voss actually here had started to cross the Australian continent in 1845 after collecting a party of settlers and two Aboriginal men. His party heads inland from coast only to meet endless adversity, and the explorers crossed drought-plagued desert, the waterlogged lands, until they retreat to a cave where they lie for weeks waiting for the rain to stop. Yeah, everything is okay actually. Yeah. So here Voss is actually sets out to cross the Australian continent 1845 here. After collecting party for settlers and two Aboriginal men here, he started his journey along with two settlers, a party of settlers and two Aboriginal men. And Voss and Laura retain a connection. You see, Voss and Laura retain a connection in spite of Voss's absence, and the story interposes developments in each of their lives. And Laura adopts an orphan child and attends a ball during Voss's absence. So when Voss was actually absent during that, Laura had adopted an orphan child. And attends a ball during the Voss absence. The traveling party here splits into two. The traveling party splits into two who went to cross the Australian, okay, to cross Australia. Nearly all members eventually perished, okay. Nearly all members eventually died. The story ends some 20 years later. The story ends some 20 years later at the garden party hosted by Laura's cousin Bill Radcliffe on the day of the unveiling. So here they are unveiling the statue of Voss, okay. The statue of Voss. Voss is here. The party is also attended by Laura, and the one remaining member of Voss expedition party is Mr. Judd. So who was the one remaining member of Voss expedition party? It was Mr. Judd, the living man, the living person, the only one of person who was alive actually, Mr. Judd. So all of them actually were perished. The story ends some 20 years later at a garden party hosted by Laura's cousin on the day of the unveiling. So here is on the day of the unveiling of the statue of Voss. The story is opening here. The story ends here. The party is also attended by Laura and the one remaining member of Voss expedition. Here it is Mr. Judd. Mr. Judd is the one remaining member of that group of people who were trying to cross Australia. Okay. The strength of the novel comes not from the physical description of the events in the story, but from the explorer's passion, insight and doom. The novel draws heavily on the complex character of Voss. The novel uses extensive religious symbol. You see, this novel is using extensive religious symbolism. Here you will find Voss is many times compared repeatedly to God, Christ and the devil. So Voss is compared to God, Christ and devil. Like Christ, he goes into the desert and he is a leader of man and he tends to the sea. So you see religious symbol. There is the use of extensive religious symbol can be found in this novel. Voss is here compared repeatedly to God, to Christ, to the devil. Like Christ, he goes into the desert and he is a leader of men and he tends to seek. And Voss and Laura have meeting. Voss and Laura have meeting in garden prior to his departure. That could be compared to the Garden of Eden. So before the departure of crossing the Australian, Voss and Laura had a meeting, and that meeting place is compared to Garden of Eden, and that meeting place is compared to the Garden of Eden. So full of religious symbol can be found in this novel. Voss, published in 57. A metaphysical thread, okay, elevates the novel also. Voss and Laura are permitted to communicate through visions, okay. They are able to communicate through visions. So metaphysical elements can be found in these novels. While presents the desert is akin to the mind of man, blank landscape in which pretensions of to godliness are brought asunder actually. In Sydney, Laura's adoption of the orphan child, Mercy, represents godliness through a plea of sacrifice. So you see, when Voss was not there, when Voss was absent, Sydney here actually, in Sydney, Laura was adopting what? Laura was adopting an orphan child. An orphan child was adopted by Laura. And that orphan child is called Mercy, represents godliness through a pure form of sacrifice. And there is a continual reference to duality in the traveling party with a group led by Voss and a group led by Judd. So Mr. Judd was the only person, okay, who was alive. Mr. Judd at the end of the novel, okay, we find who were trying to cross Australia. It was only Mr. Judd was the alive person. So there was the duality. There was the continual reference to duality in the traveling party with a group led by Voss, and another group was led by Mr. Judd, who was the only living person at the time, eventually dividing after the death of the unifying agent, Mr. Palfreyman. So after the death of the Mr. Palfreyman, who was the unifying agent, he used to unify them, Voss and Judd. But after the death of the agent, Mr. Palfreyman, so they divided their group. Judd and Voss, they divided their group. So the intellect and pretensions of godliness of Mr. Voss are compared unfavorably with the simplicity and the earthliness of the pardoned convict Judd. Mr. Judd, it is implied, has accepted the blackness of the desert of the mind, and in doing so become more godlike. So Mr. Judd has accepted the blankness of the desert of the mind and is doing so become more godlike figure. The spirituality of Australia's indigenous people also infuses the sections of the book said in the desert. So you should know the summary. You should know the summary of Voss, because Voss is a very important novel, okay, for the perspective of any exam. Okay? Voss is a very important exam for research perspective of Voss. Another important work is Riders in the Chariot. Okay, Riders in the Chariot is important work. It is the sixth novel by Australian author Patrick White. Patrick White has also written Riders in the Chariot. Riders in the Chariot. And Patrick White's Sarita Parila is actually the fictional setting. Sarita Parila is the fictional setting of Patrick White. You will be finding it out in the next slide here. So here, it was published in 1961 and won the Miles Franklin Award that year. It also won the 1965 Gold Medal for the Australian Literature Society. The novel is the story of the lives of four loosely connected people whose common link is the mystic experience of the chariot of the title described in the book of Ezekiel, that is in Hebrews. Okay, so there is a reference of Hebrews. So here the novel is the story of the lives of four loosely connected people whose common link is the mystic experience of the chariot of the title described the book of the Ezekiel, and the traces their life towards the point where they realize share the same vision. The novel combines literature, mysticism, suburban life of 1950s Australia to show the ignorance and the prejudice of the everyday people in reaction to the few who sees the infinite, snowballing and the catastrophic consequence. By the way, here the important here that is correctly cut. Riders in the Chariot. Riders in the Chariot is an important novel by Voss. And you see here the book begins with an epigraph form. Why it is important? The book is beginning with an epigraph from the Marriage of Heaven and Hell, in which William Blake is imagining a conversation with the prophets Isaiah and Ezekiel. Why this book is important? This because there is a reference of the work of William Blake, that is the Marriage of Heaven and Hell. The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. The book begins with an epigraph from the Marriage of Heaven and Hell, in which William Blake imagines a conversation with the prophets Isaiah and Ezekiel. That's why this book is actually very important. Chariot, the Chariot. That here it is Riders in the Chariot. Riders in the Chariot is beginning with an epigraph from the Marriage of Heaven and Hell, in which William Blake imagining a conversation with the prophets and Isaiah and Ezekiel. So the solid mandala is important work. Another important work is solid mandala. The solid mandala. Okay, it's the seventh published novel by Australian author Patrick White, and he was the Nobel Prize winner of 1973. First published in 1966. So the solid mandala is important work also by Patrick White. It details the story of two brothers. One is Waldo, another is Arthur Brown. Waldo and Arthur Brown. So it is depicting the two brothers, Waldo and Arthur Brown, the solid mandala, with a focus on the facets of their symbolic relationship. It is set in White's fictional suburb, that is Sarsa Parila. So here this is the you should remember, okay, this is the fictional setting, okay. This is the fictional setting of Patrick White's, that is Sarsa Parila. Sarsa Parila is a fictional setting, the suburb, a fictional suburb that was created by Patrick White. Patrick White has created this fictional suburb called Sarsa Parila, a setting he often employed in his book, in his other books as well, such as the Riders in the Chariot. Okay, so Sarsa Parila was also appeared in the book Riders in the Chariot, where the title has been taken from. There is a reference of there is a reference of Marriage of Heaven and Hell. Riders in the Chariot. There is a reference of Marriage of Heaven and Hell by William Blake. The book is typical of White's writing style and is slow-paced with little considerable action, instead focusing upon the inner turmoils of the aforementioned characters here. So here two characters, the brothers Waldo and Arthur Brown. Here the solid mandala. In this novel we find the fictional suburb called Sarsa Parila. This is important thing. And the Riders in the Chariot also we find the mention of the reference of Sarsa Parila, the fictional setting created by none other than Patrick White, who got the Nobel Prize in 1973. In 1973, Patrick White got the Nobel Prize. This is the most important one here, the Vivisector. The Vivisector, the most longest novel by Patrick White. Vivisector, the most longest novel here by Patrick White here, the Vivisector. Okay, it is the 8th published novel by Patrick White, first published in 1970, and it details the lifelong creative journey of a fictional artist and painter. So this is fictional artist and painter. So in which novel we find the fictional artist and the painter? It is here Hartel Duffield. Okay, Hartel Duffield appears in the fictional. Here the fictional artist painter appears in the novel Vivisector, which is the longest novel by Patrick White. 8th novel published by Patrick White, the longest novel by Patrick White, where the fictional and artist painter Hartel Duffield appeared. Okay, and named for its sometimes cruel analysis of Duffield and the major figures in his life. The book explores the universal themes like the suffering of the artist, the need for truth, and the meaning of existence. So these books actually, this book is named for its sometimes cruel analysis of the character, the protagonist, Duffield. Okay, and here Patrick White has explored the universal themes like the suffering of the artist, the need for truth, and the meaning of existence. Vivisector, one of the finest novels by Patrick White. One of the finest novels by Patrick White. Okay, this is the longest. Here it is written the longest of White's novel. The longest of White's novel is the Vivisector. Okay, was written in 1968. While the novel was dedicated to a painter called Sidney Nolan. So this novel, it is Vivisector, was dedicated to whom? To a painter called Sidney Nolan. But here Patrick White is saying that there is no reference, there is no link between the novel's painter and to whom he has dedicated. There is no reference, there is no link between the novel's painter, that is called Duffield, and the original painter to whom he has dedicated. But here you see Patrick White denied any connection. There is no connection between Hartel Duffield and the novel's character, central character, and Nolan or any other painter. So he had denied that there is no connection between the painter Sidney Nolan and the novel's painter called Hartel Duffield. Okay. Other literary critics have interpreted the novel as being largely autobiographical as well. So other critics also interpreted this novel, Vivisector, as largely autobiographical novel. And with the Australian literary critic George T. Williams noting that the Vivisector is a great Australian novel, I think it is White's great autobiography, to be honest. Where the Williamson, the another critic has remarked that the Vivisector, the longest novel, is a great Australian novel, and I think it is White's great autobiography, to be honest. Got it? And Hartel Duffield is born into a poor Australian. So here is the story of this is the summary of the story here. That is Vivisector. Hartel Duffield is born into a poor Australian family. They adopt him out of the wealthy Courtneys who were seeking a companion for their hunchback daughter Rhoda. So Hartel Duffield is born into a poor Australian family, and they adopt him out of the wealthy Courtneys. Who were seeking a companion for their hunchback daughter Rhoda. So Hartel Duffield is the painter of this Vivisector novel by Patrick White. And you see the precocious Hartel the protagonist gains artistic inspiration from the world that surrounds him, his adoptive mother Mammon, and Rhoda, the prostitute Nancy. Okay, Rhoda, the prostitute Nancy, who is the first real love. The prostitute Nancy was the first real love for Hartel. Okay? And the wealthy heiress Olivia Davenport, his Greek mistress Harold Phelpsy, and finally the child prodigy Kathy Welcome. So he becomes famous, and his paintings are in great demand. However, he is unimpressed by the monetary and the status gain. This brings and continues to live a Spartan life, beholden to nobody, even the Prime Minister. In his final years, he is drawn closer. So you see, in his final years, he is drawn closer to his sister Rhoda, and after a stroke, causes partial paralysis. So after a stroke, okay, he was suffered. So after a stroke, causes partial paralysis. He is assisted by his protege Don Lethribis to produce a huge final magnum opus to God, the Vivisector. The Whites, who is the biographer of Whites? Patrick White's biographer was David Murr. David Murr was the Patrick White's biographer. He has claimed that White was being considered by a Nobel Prize committee to receive the Nobel Literature Prize for this work. Okay, White's biographer, who was the Patrick White's biographer? The biographer of Patrick White is David Murr. David Murr was the biographer of Patrick White here. Okay. White was announced on 26 March 2010 as one of 6 authors shortlisted for the Lost Man Booker Prize. For this novel Vivisector. For this novel Vivisector, he was shortlisted for Lost Man Booker Prize of 1970. A contest delayed by 14 years because of reshuffling of the. By the way, Lost Man's Booker Prize, Vivisector was nominated, shortlisted for Lost Man Booker Prize here. Vivisector by the longest novel by Patrick White, who got the Nobel Prize in 1973. Okay. And another important novel is here, The Eye of the Storm. Eye of the Storm. This is the 9th published novel, and it tells the story of Elizabeth Hunter, the powerful matriarch of her family, who still maintains a destructive iron grip on those who come to say a farewell to her her final moments upon her deathbed. So the Eye of the Storm is another important novel by Eye of the Storm is another important novel by here Australian writer Patrick White. A Fringe of Leaves, another important work. A young colonist woman, that is Ellen, travels to the Australian colony of Van Diemen's Land now in the early 1830s with her older husband Austin. So remember just A Fringe of Leaves. Just remember, don't need to read the summary here. A Fringe of Leaves, then you have The Eye of the Storm. These are important works also by Patrick White. Another important works by The Twyborn Affair, Memoirs of Many in One, and The Hanging Garden. Unfinished. This was unfinished work by The Hanging Garden was the unfinished, published posthumously. This is also a novel by Patrick White. So remember the name of the novels here. The Twyborn Affair, Memoirs of Many One, The Hanging Garden. These are novels. Okay, but important novels are Solid Man, The Tree of Man, Vivisector, Voss. And the first one is here, that is the debut novel. Okay. What is the debut novel? What is the debut novel of Patrick White? Tell me in the comment box. Okay, and he has, apart from all these novels, he has also written some plays also, short story collections. Okay, The Burned Ones, The Cockatoos, Three Uneasy Pieces, Burned Ones, The Cockatoos, The Uneasy Pieces. These are important short story collections by Patrick White. So he was a dramatist, he was a novelist, he was a short story writer, he was a poetry collection, he had a biographer, he was autobiography as well. He has written also autobiography as well. So here short story collections here, The Burned Ones, The Cockatoos, Three Uneasy Pieces here. And the plays like The Harm Funeral, The Season at Sarissa Perilla. Okay, the plays, he has also written plays like The Harm Funeral, The Season at Sarissa Perilla. Okay. For which exam? Asha, TET exam means for which state? TET. Okay. No worry. Okay. TET exam. Okay, studying TET exam for state. Okay. So you have completed your B.Ed, is it? So plays here like The Ham Funeral, The Season at Sarissa Perilla, the fictional setting created by Patrick White, A Cherry Soul. Okay, my pleasure, Asha. So how are you? Night on Balt Mountain and Big Toys. These are plays by Patrick White. The Ham Funeral, The Season at Sarissa Perilla, A Cherry Soul, Karnataka. Okay, got it. A Cherry Soul, Night on Balt Mountain and Big Toys. These are plays written by Patrick White, the Australian writer. And here is the one screenplay he has also written, The Night and the Product. Okay, the screenplay, The Night and the Product, also written by Patrick White. Okay, and here is the last slide, the autobiography. Here, Prose in the Glass, Prose in the Happy Valley. Yeah, Happy Valley. Excellent. So Happy Valley was the first debut novel. The debut novel, sort of excellent. Happy Valley is the debut novel. Yeah, got it, sort of. Happy Valley is the debut novel by Patrick White. He is an important writer from the perspective of UGC and English Literature exam. So autobiography here, Prose in the Glass, published in 1981. The first 150 pages are given over to an introspective self-portrait. The two sections called Journeys and Episodes. So these are important works by Prose in the Glass, autobiography by this is Patrick White. He got the Nobel Prize in 1973. I'm also fine here, Asha. So these were all important works. By Patrick White. Okay, I'll be doing another session. Okay, for CUTPG. If you want, okay, you can join. Okay. Now it is 9:14 and after probably at 10:20 or 10:10. Okay, I'll be doing another session for CUTPG. Do join at the time. Okay. I'm fine also. For CUTPG, I will be doing another session for 10, probably 10:15. Okay, let me 10:15 or 10:20. I'll be informing in the Telegram channel. Okay. Thank you, Asha, Saurabh, everyone, Subramshu as well. Those who are watching, do like the session. Do like the session. I'll be ending here. And those who are new, please do join the Telegram channel. That is Santosh Sahu UGC Net. Those who are new, please do join the Telegram channel. Santosh Sahu UGC Net. Okay, Santosh Sahu UGC Net. Well done. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Do like the session as well. Okay. I'll be ending the session here. I'll be ending the session here. Okay. I'll be conducting another session. I'll be conducting another session for CUTPG. Okay. Okay. At 10:15 or 10:20. Okay. 10:20 or 10:15. Okay. After dinner. Okay. So let's here and end the session here. Thank you. Thank you. Do like the session as well. Do like the session, guys.